Dink Pate has a lot of hype, but is he worth the buzz? This is Floor and Ceiling. Let's break him down. Dink Pate became the youngest pro in American basketball history last season when he signed with the G League Ignite. After the program's closure, Dink is now with the Mexico City Capitanes, once again playing in the G League. Pate has been billed as a big 6'8" playmaker, but in my evaluation, and if I'm being completely truthful, he's much more of a very raw shooting guard who needs a ton of development still. Dink will likely declare for the 2025 NBA draft, but I struggle to see him as anything other than a late second round swing. If I was in his camp, my evaluation would be geared towards leaving the G League, spending a season abroad, and then aiming for 2026. However, that doesn't seem like it will be the case, so let's start with what Pate has done well this season, and that begins in transition. There, more than in any other department, Dink can use his size and length, and at times, his ball handling and passing. Now, these flashes in the latter areas are very scarce, but if there's anywhere you can buy into them, it's in the open court. For those like me who prefer to look at the draft as a glass half full, Pate sort of reminds me of Trenton Flowers. He's quite young, still growing into his body, and he wants to handle the ball and play make. I don't think that Dink is as athletic or as bouncy as Flowers, but he's had his moments in transition, and he's thrown down a handful of exciting dunks. The big issue is, and this permeates through Dink's entire game, is that he adds very little value in the half court. Sure, one can argue that he's still really young, but I expect more after 2 seasons as a pro. Dink's process looks really murky to me. He barely plays within the flow of his team. He doesn't create many advantages, if any, and his stats, quite frankly, look very ugly. As a result, we find that Pate neither passes the eye test, nor any sort of look at his advanced numbers. The most important thing for me right now is that Pate is 6'8", he's long and presumably athletic, but he really struggles to get to his spots. As a whole, Dink doesn't touch the paint as much as I would like, and he creates very few advantages with his handle, be it as a finisher as we're seeing, or as a playmaker as I'll dive into. This season, Pate is finishing 43% of his layups. That's already a rough number, but it goes down to 31% in the half court. Just keeping it real here, there's not much that you can do with that, considering that the only shots he makes at the rim are essentially when he's wide open in transition. This worries me even more when I consider that the G League is generally very lacking when it comes to rim protection. Again, trying to look at the positives that exist, Pate can drill spot-up shots. Dink is making around 39% of his catch-and-shoot threes, although that is on only 19 makes for the year. However, that's an improvement on last season's figures with the G League Ignite, when Pate only made around 24% of his catch-and-shoots. Dink has height on his side, and his release point is alright, but I don't think that his jumper looks that clean as a whole. It's pretty inconsistent, and Pate doesn't really flow or snap into the movement shots that he attempts. Contextually, this also goes against Dink's theoretical upside as a wing-sized player who can play the guard. With Mexico City this season, his best moments have come off the ball, and the team has Trey Burke or even Juan Toscano Anderson handling point guard duties a lot. Instead, some of these fun flashes have been when Dink can attack a closeout, but again, these have been really sporadic. As of now though, it is probably his best short-term role. Beyond that, it's tough to really buy into any other flashes near the basket. Dink has a floater which looks kinda promising, but that's about it. As for any other shot-making upside, again, it's really streaky. For NBA purposes, I'd go further and say that it's entirely theoretical. With the Ignite, Pate made around 37% of his off-the-dribble jumpers. From 3, that number went down to about 19%. This season, he's at 32% on all of his off-the-dribble jumpers and a better 29% from deep. But basically, what we're looking at is that these shots barely go in, and again, I don't really like Pate's process. He doesn't use ball screens effectively, he creates little separation between him and his defender, and then, evidently, the conversion doesn't hold up at all. When it comes to the half court, Pate is effectively relegated to being a spot-up shooter, but he doesn't take threes at a high volume or with high complexity. From time to time, as a self-creator, I like when Pate tries to snake a pick, and it also seems like he wants to operate around the elbows, so the idea of that is cool. I also think that his fadeaway eventually has a chance of becoming a dangerous tool, but broadly speaking, the execution, unfortunately, is not there at all. Pate had one of his best games overall this season, including with his shot at the G League Winter Showcase against the Rip City Remix. That was in front of many NBA executives, so I'm sure that some were intrigued. But Dink's day-to-day reality is way different than a single 26-point outing where he got hot. Now, let's dive into Pate's playmaking. Like I said, I actually view him as a shooting guard currently, and I also mentioned earlier that his best moments have come off the ball. But ideally, the intrigue with Dink is that he can make some plays with the rock in his hands. This season, he's averaging 1.6 assists to 1.8 turnovers per game. In terms of total numbers, that's 35 assists to 40 turnovers. So once again, we look at the numbers, and that's not super enticing. But let's also take a look at the tape. My main takeaway is that Dink's reads, for the most part, are very basic. Pate can pass after getting a screen, but I don't even know that I would say that he uses those picks. Usually, he's just getting the ball, dribbling around the screen, and then looking to immediately dish it off. The issue is that Dink doesn't really probe into the paint or manipulate the defense at all. Then, on top of that, he's also fairly inaccurate when he looks to facilitate. This applies both with his handle, which really isn't dynamic, and as I mentioned earlier, fails to create space, and also subsequently with his passing. Sometimes it's not even that this leads to a turnover necessarily, it's that Pate passes the ball and he doesn't get it into his teammate's pocket, or he makes it easy for the pass to get deflected. Then, once we get into the actual turnovers, there's just too many avoidable ones. I'd even call them unforced errors, again, both with Dink's handle and his passing. I watch his games, and it's really tough for me to view him as a playmaker of any sort. I'm not saying that Pate cannot get there. Looking back at Trenton Flowers, since I mentioned him earlier as a point of reference, he struggled badly as a ball handler when he first joined the NBL, but a lot of development would need to happen. Pate is going to need a lot more time in the G League, even after 2 years there, and few NBA teams nowadays have the patience for that. On the defensive end, it's unfortunate, but my evaluation of Dink Pate doesn't get much better. The quote-unquote good news is that he's super young. Pate is 18 until March 10th, so he should have a lot of time to improve. But honestly, that time might only be an idea, because it seems like Dink wants to get to the NBA ASAP, and teams will not give him that much time unless he improves very quickly. This is the case both on and off the ball, with the latter area showing up in some of these clips that we've just seen. Broadly speaking, I actually don't mind if a young prospect makes mistakes, even many mistakes, especially on the ball. If they're engaged, show progress, and have tools, then I generally trust that NBA teams can coach them up over time. With Pate though, I'm just not sure that he meets any of those three areas. To be clear, I don't think he's lazy, I think he's young, but I don't really find him to be engaged, active, or overly competitive on D. Whenever he faces a straight line drive, the odds are that Dink is going to give up the lane right to the rim. Like I said earlier, the G League lacks rim protectors, so maybe his tape looks a bit uglier because of this, but I just don't see any particularly encouraging flashes. There are times when Pate can kinda recover with his length and more or less force a miss, but largely speaking, I don't see him making multiple or even second efforts most of the time. Then, returning to his off-ball defense, it's really rough. There are too many possessions in which Dink appears very unsure of what to do, where to be, or who to defend. From my evaluation, his teammates regularly have to call out who he's supposed to guard, he gets lost way too often, and I just feel like this should not be happening in his second season as a pro. Of course, I'm not expecting any 18-year-old to be an instinctual defender. That's why Cooper Flagg is an anomaly after all, but Dink is making high school level reads while in an NBA organization. He needs to be a lot better, and that goes for both ends, which is why I think that Pate is at most a second round swing, and I really genuinely think that he should consider another draft year, but overseas in a different league. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, make sure to leave a comment telling me what you think of Dink Pate, make sure to subscribe to the Floor and Ceiling Substack, and if you enjoyed this video, if you want to watch content like this, make sure to subscribe. Take care, and I'll catch you guys next time.